Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Rebel Moon in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, friends. In today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Rebel Moon. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I am going to tell you, I'm also going to give you all the information on which OT platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film, storyline, starcast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you, friends, to watch this video till the end. So let's start the video. Rebel Moon Part 1. A Child of Fire, or simply Rebel Moon, is a 2023 American epic space opera film directed by Zack Snyder from a screenplay he co-wrote with Kurt Johnstad and Shay Hatton. Its ensemble cast features Sofia Boutella, Djimon Hounsou, Ed Skrein, Michelle Heisman, Bae Doona, Ray Fisher, Charlie Hunnam, and Anthony Hopkins. The film is set in a fictional galaxy ruled by the imperialistic Mother World, whose military, the Imperium, threatens a village on the moon Velt. Korra, a former Imperium soldier, ventures on a quest to recruit warriors from across the galaxy to make a stand against the Imperium before they return to Velt. Following a limited theatrical release on December 15, 2023, Rebel Moon was released by Netflix on December 22nd. It received generally negative reviews from critics. A sequel, Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, released on April 19, 2024. An R-rated director's cut, titled Rebel Moon Chapter 1, Chalice of Blood, was released on August 2, 2024. 4. Plot: Atticus Noble, a sadistic admiral of the militaristic Imperium, arrives at a village on the moon Velt on behalf of the Mother World, a galactic empire in pursuit of conquest, fueled by centuries of war. He explains that his troops are hunting for a band of rebels led by siblings Deborah and Darien Bloodaxe, and offers to buy the village's surplus grain. The village's leader, Sindri, declines, claiming that the villagers barely have enough to survive. A farmer, Gunnar, ignoring earlier warnings from Sindri and Korra, another farmer, indicates that the villagers might have a higher amount. Noble kills Sindri and orders Gunnar to prepare grain for them in 10 weeks, which would not leave the villagers with enough to survive. Noble departs, leaving several soldiers and a Jimmy robot to oversee the harvest. After facing harassment from a soldier, Jimmy befriends Sam, a villager. Korra prepares to leave, but finds most of the soldiers preparing to rape Sam and kills the soldiers with help from Aris, a soldier disgusted by his own comrades' actions. Jimmy intervenes and defects, saving Sam. Korra warns the villagers to mount a defense, knowing that Noble will kill them once he returns. Korra and Gunnar depart for the port town of Providence, intending to recruit warriors for the village's defense, including Titus, a disgraced Imperium general. During their journey, she reveals to Gunnar that she once served the Imperium as a soldier, having been adopted and named Arthalais by Belisarius, an Imperium commander, after he eradicated her home planet's population, including her family. She was assigned as the bodyguard to Motherworld Princess Issa, who was expected to usher in an end to the Imperium's conquests. Issa and her parents were assassinated, with Belisarius subsequently declaring himself regent and continuing the Imperium's conquests. Arriving at Providence, the pair meet smuggler and criminal Kai, who agrees to take them to Titus. He takes them to recruit Tarak, an ex-criminal who frees himself from slavery by taming a griffin-like Bennu, and Nemesis, a partially cybernetic swordswoman. The group arrives at a gladiator arena on a moon, finding Titus in a drunken stupor. Titus initially refuses to join, but agrees to do so after Korra suggests that he avenge his deceased soldiers. Using Gunnar's previous dealing with the Bloodaxes, the group then arrives at the planet Charon to meet them. Darien agrees to defend the village and brings several rebels, including his lieutenant Milius, while Deborah, unconvinced that a victory against Noble's dreadnought is possible, declines. After they depart, Noble arrives on Charon and eradicates its population as punishment for assisting the rebels. Kai tells Korra that he has been moved by her quest to abandon his life as a smuggler and that he has one last shipment to drop off. He takes the group to an unregistered trade depot at which Noble's personal craft has arrived and restrains and betrays them to Noble, revealing he had always intended to do so for the bounties on their heads. Noble identifies Cora and Titus as deserters, Tarak as a former prince, and Nemesis as the assassin of 16 Imperial officers and their security detail in revenge for her murdered children. Kai demands that Gunnar paralyze Cora. Gunnar instead frees her and kills Kai. In the ensuing battle, the other warriors are freed and casualties include Darien. Noble is apparently killed by Cora. Afterwards, Cora and Gunnar return with the surviving warriors to Velt, with Jimmy watching them on their way to the village. Noble is recovered by the Imperium, and he is revived after speaking on an astral plane with Belisarius, who demands that Noble end the insurgency and bring Cora to him alive so he can execute her himself. Music. Main article, Rebel Moon, soundtrack. The score was composed by Tom Holkenborg, who has previously contributed to the score for the Snyder-directed Man of Steel 2013 and scored Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice 2016 alongside Hans Zimmer, in addition to scoring Zack Snyder's Justice League and Army of the Dead, both 2021, as well the Snyder-produced 300 Rise of an Empire 2014. Release Rebel Moon had a limited theatrical release on 70mm film in 4 major cities: Los Angeles, Egyptian Theatre, New York City, Paris Theatre, Toronto, TIFF Lightbox, and London, Prince Charles Cinema, on December 15, 2023, before its streaming debut on December 22 by Netflix. Snyder announced plans to issue an R-rated director's cut in addition to the PG-13 rated cut. Zack Snyder is a pop fantasy filmmaker who now has a fanboy cult around him. In the 2 decades since Snyder made his feature directorial debut with the grainy, unsettling 2004 reboot of Dawn of the Dead, his flamboyant fusion of visual wizardry, technological fixation, and kick-ass spirit has made him, at least in some quarters, read the Comic-Con and video game demo, a creative hero for the age of escapism. Fans who grew up feasting on such Snyder extravaganzas as 300, Watchmen, and Sucker Punch then saw his much ballyhooed entree into the DC comic book sphere, marked by ambitious but maligned misfires. Yet in 2021, the release of Zack Snyder's Justice League, his uncut and quite extraordinary version of the movie that Warner Bros. Had tapped Joss Whedon to mangle into an audience-friendly product, was a vindication that also marked a new peak of reverence for the Snyder cult. Despite cries for other Snyder cuts, Warner Bros. Wasn't about to let a big-money maverick like Snyder back into the vaults. But Netflix, a studio streamer that never met a director it couldn't throw $1 zillion at, along with the words, "Please let the film run on as long as you'd like," rolled out the red carpet for Snyder to make Rebel Moon, a 4-hour interplanetary sci-fi action spectacular that's being released in 2 parts. Rebel Moon Part 1. A Child of Fire will be given a limited theatrical run starting December 15th before it drops on Netflix 1 week later. Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, is set to be released on April 19, 2024. And, surprise, longer R-rated versions of both films will be available to stream on Netflix at a later date. Rebel Moon isn't based on anything, it's a complete original. Yet in another sense, it's based on about 12 things. It's Star Wars meets Guardians of the Galaxy meets The Lord of the Rings meets Black Panther, all smelted down and reduced to a highly edible sauce of overfamiliar tropes, minus any semblance of a sense of humor. Movies this derivative, in my view, are inherently uncool, but you could argue that what's almost cool about Rebel Moon is that it's so unabashedly a gloss on the 1977 Star Wars and no other Star Wars movie. It's got a proudly basic Rebels versus the Evil Empire plot, with rubber-faced creatures and a noble stoked with moxie Zen fighter heroine, Cora, Sofia Boutella, who's like Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and Princess Leia all rolled into one. The story begins on Velt, a moon of what looks like a fusion of Jupiter and Saturn. The planet looms in the background like a weirdly artificial piece of wallpaper, where Cora is part of a hardy community of medieval farmers who live in the shadow of the Mother World. The Mother World's king and queen have been assassinated and replaced by vicious autocrats, who want to crush the pocket of insurgents known as the Blood Axes. The good farmers of Velt have sold some of their grain to the Blood Axes, and early on they're invaded by a Motherworld brigade led by Atticus Noble, an evil admiral who specializes in face-to-face terrorism. The British actor Ed Skrein, in his fascist with bangs haircut, is the best thing in the movie. He's like Rami Malek playing Jim Carrey as Darth Vader as a Nazi out of Cabaret. Cora has a thorny and rather turgid backstory. After her family was killed, she was adopted as a daughter by the Motherworld's ominous overseer. But now, as a resident of Velt, it's up to her to travel to distant planets, a great many of them, to gather up a fellowship of rebel fighters. The movie is episodic in the extreme. Here's another planet. Here's another colorful character to recruit for the team. Here's another slow-mo interlude of ultra-violent combat. Snyder, who shot the film himself, stages it on an impressively lavish scale. All the CGI sprawl a budget of $166 million can buy, and a handful of the episodes are fun, like one where the noble hunk Tarak, Stasnair, frees himself from indentured servitude by harnessing a giant blackbird who's like a Ray Harryhausen creature. Sofia Boutella as Cora holds the film together with her dour ferocity, and Djimon Hounsou as the fallen but still noble General Titus, Charlie Hunnam as the mercenary starship pilot Kai, and Anthony Hopkins as the voice of Jimmy the Droid, who's like C-3PO with more acting talent, make their presence felt. Yet Rebel Moon, while eminently watchable, is a movie built so entirely out of spare parts that it may in the end be for Snyder cultists only. The end is just the start of something, according to one of the action figure deep heroes of Rebel Moon, Part 1, Child of Fire. The lumbering first half of Zack Snyder's planned two-part Star Wars knockoff. After 133 minutes, give or take 7 for credits, Snyder's latest gang of misfits are finally ready to fight space Nazis. It's Akira Kurosawa in space again, only this time everything's rendered with storyboard perfection and a frustrating emphasis on sheer visual scale, despite a general lack of eye-catching details. Snyder, Army of the Dead, and his two credited co-writers, Shay Hatton and Kurt Johnstad, never really try to be original. Instead, they joyless trudge through formulaic territory, only now with a bigger budget and a Snydery compulsion to replicate the looks and styles of other movies and comic books, among other media. Rebel Moon often looks more like an animated pitch for a movie than an actual movie with human characters, urgent drama, emotional stakes, and so forth. Everything's big and corny and ungainly in Rebel Moon, starting with the space farmers who try and obviously fail to resist a visiting party of space fascists, representing the Motherworld's formerly great colonial power. The farmers are initially led by a brawny Corey Stoll, whose needlessly swole physique and braided pushbroom beard ostensibly contrasts his character with Admiral Atticus Noble, Ed Skrein, a very pale goose-stepper with a short temper and an army at his back. Stoll's character dies pretty quickly, because even a father figure with a barrel chest and Viking snuffleupagus beard cannot defeat Noble and his fellow would-be overlords. Now the farmers of Oh Gosh Velt must plan for the Motherworld's next visit. Their champion, a petite farmer with a past named Cora, Sofia Boutella, then sets out to find warriors who can train her people to fight back. She finds stock types with prominently exoticized backgrounds like the Scottish mercenary Kai, Charlie Hunnam, and the Beastmaster Prince Tarak, Stasnair, now a slave. As usual, Snyder doesn't seem to care about these characters so much as he likes their style guide features, like their cleavage, their haircuts, and their hard-stressed accents. Some actors, like Hunnam and Stoll, dig in with both hands, but not everyone fares as well with dialogue that never stops expositing, even as matte-painting replica landscape shots threaten to swallow up whoever's pushing the plot this time around. It's usually Cora, but other characters help to establish the movie's passing interest in the usual post-Star Wars space opera themes of resistance, hope, and compassion, mostly through bumper sticker dialogue and G.I. Joe poses. Some critics will joke that Rebel Moon resembles AI art since it slouches through the motions of another space opera homage without much art, grace, or human discernment. Others would do well to remember that this sort of overproduced van art cinema has always been Snyder's style. In his previous movie's better moments, you can see Snyder and his collaborators' joy in trying to synthesize a grab bag of tropes and ideas into mildly canny maximalist epics. Viewers' expectations are still often only tweaked and not subverted, like in the Rebel Moon scene where Cora rescues fellow Velt farmer Gunnar, Michiel Heisman, from a gross-looking alien publican who grabs Gunnar's crotch and threatens to rape him at a Mos Eisley-style tavern. Cora still gets called a bitch a couple of times by Gunnar's attacker, but then she gets to fly around the bar at a typically Snydery slow, fast, slow clip. That overcompensatory style of speed-toggling action, also known as speed ramping, has been Snyder's signature move for a while now, so as paying lip service to female protagonists who at best get to posture more than their male co-stars. Still, it's hard to care about Cora or supporting characters like the laser sword-wielding cyborg nemesis, Duna Bay, who also wears a wide-brimmed Korean gat on her head. Then again, women aren't the only ones who get negligible consideration, as we see when Tarak whispers pseudo-folksy wisdom and wrangles a black griffin that looks a lot like Toothless the Dragon. Everybody walks and talks like a robot here, but only some are meant to be read as robotic. Rebel Moon also only really looks good when it's focused on things crashing into or flying above other things. Sometimes they hover over and then crash into things, which has its appeal. Unfortunately, none of the fun or affection that likely went into the making of Rebel Moon has survived the transition from storyboard to screen, making it harder to care when characters tease viewers with perverse humor. Watch out for those tentacles, Atticus, or aching sincerity. Kindness is a virtue worth fighting for. Heroes like Cora circulate in order to justify prefab epicness, but they don't make Rebel Moon move any faster towards its foregone cliffhanger ending. And yet it moves, I guess. Streaming powerhouse Netflix will be teaming up with Zack Snyder after the unprecedented success of his movie Army of the Dead. After Zack's lengthy run at Warner Bros. In DC, he's found a new home with the streaming service promising an array of exciting new projects. His next project, Rebel Moon, has been touted to be an epic two-parter with the likelihood of spin-off properties. A lifelong Star Wars fan, Snyder initially intended Rebel Moon as a Star Wars movie. He had the idea to pitch Rebel Moon as a more mature take on the universe created by George Lucas. That idea was shut down after Walt Disney Co. acquired Lucasfilm in 2012. Snyder then set up a deal with Deborah Snyder's production company, Quarry, and Netflix for Rebel Moon to be reworked into an entirely new universe. Rebel Moon represents a slight shift for Zack Snyder into a distinct sci-fi subgenre that is set in a peaceful colony on the border of a faraway galaxy. The one-time peaceful colony faces an existential threat from the armies of the tyrannical regent Belisarius. Residents of the colony, in a bid to repel this great evil, send out a young female dispatch rider named Cora, who has a checkered past to solicit the help of different warriors from neighboring planets. Below are all the details regarding the cast, trailer, release date, plot, and everything we know so far about Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire will hit Netflix just in time for Christmas on December 21st at 7 p.m. PT. The movie was previously scheduled to release on the streaming service a few hours later at midnight on December 22nd, but was moved up a few hours to let fans watch the movie even sooner. This has become a trend for Netflix to release a buzzy title in the days leading up to Christmas. In the past, hit films such as Don't Look Up, Glass Onion, A Knives Out Mystery, Bird Box, and Six Underground were released on the service during the holiday season. The sci-fi epic had its first official public screening on December 1, 2023, during the film's panel at CCXP. Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire will have a limited theatrical release on December 15, 2023. Snyder's previous film with Netflix, Army of the Dead, screened for 1 week in May 2021 across 600 theaters in the U.S. The limited theatrical release will also include a run of 70mm screenings which will occur across 4 cities: Los Angeles, New York City, Toronto, London. Is there a tear? The first teaser trailer for Rebel Moon was unveiled during a presentation at Gamescom 2023 on August 22, 2023. Running at over 3.5 minutes long, The trailer gives fans a real good look at the world of the film, as well as all the high-octane action and slow motion that many have come to expect from Snyder. The full trailer for Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire, was released by Netflix on November 12, 2023, as part of their Geeked Week 23 event, set to a remixed version of T. Rex's Children of the Revolution, the trailer gives us a better look at the story as the outcast Korra travels across the galaxy to recruit warriors to take down a tyrannical intergalactic force mist. If you enjoyed the Geeked Week trailer, check out Zack Snyder's breakdown. He gets into all the nerdy technical and story aspects of the trailer that you might have missed. A behind-the-scenes featurette for Rebel Moon was unveiled during Netflix's Totem event on June 17, 2023, previewing the film's massive scope and several of the cast members' reactions to working with Snyder on the film. The first pieces of footage for the film were released in a sizzle reel for Netflix's 2023 film slate. Sofia Boutella plays the role of Korra, the young woman burdened with the task of marshaling a defense force to stand against the forces of Regent Belisarius. Boutella is best known for her role as Gazelle in the action spy comedy Kingsman: The Secret Service. She is also known for her portrayal of Jayla in the sci-fi action film Star Trek Beyond. Her other film credits include Atomic Blonde, Climax, Hotel Artemis, and The Mummy. Two-time Oscar winner Anthony Hopkins will be playing the voice of Jimmy, a JC-4035 sentient mechanized robot who once protected a defeated king. Snyder described the character as a wild card who is on a journey of self-discovery. Snyder also compared Jimmy to Lancelot, stating that he brings an Arthurian element to the sci-fi fantasy film. Fans familiar with Hopkins' work would suggest his role on Rebel Moon is keeping in line with the career trajectory of the acclaimed thespian. Anthony Hopkins is one of the most renowned and respected actors in the industry, and is best known for his role as the frightening Hannibal Lecter in the film The Silence of the Lambs, as well as its sequels Hannibal and Red Dragon. He also played the role of Mission Commander Swanbeck in the film Mission Impossible 2. He won his second Academy Award in 2021 for his leading role in Florian Zeller's acclaimed drama The Father. Djimon Hounsou will be on the cast of Rebel Moon as General Titus. Details about this character are relatively still unknown. Hounsou is an actor of incredible talent and expertise. He is best known for his roles in films like Blood Diamond and Amistad. Hounsou also has starred in several MCU titles, including Guardians of the Galaxy and Captain Marvel as Korath the Pursuer. His other movie credits include Shazam, In America, and Furious 7. Ed Skrein plays the role of Regent Belisarius, the ferocious and cunning interplanetary warlord who plans to lay siege on a colony in a distant galaxy. Skrein is best known for his role as Dario Naharis in the third season of Game of Thrones. He is also quite popular for playing the villain Ajax, Francis, in Deadpool. Skrein's other movie credits include Born a King, Alita Battle Angel, and Barry Jenkins' If Beale Street Could Talk. Other cast members of Rebel Moon include Charlie Hunnam, Sons of Anarchy, as Kai, a mercenary starship pilot, Ray Fisher, Zack Snyder's Justice League, and Cleopatra Coleman, the Last Man on Earth, as Darian and Deborah Bloodaxe, Michiel Heisman, the flight attendant, Gunnar, a farmer and friend of Deborah, Gina Malone, The Hunger Games Catching Fire, as Harmata, a spider warrior, Staz Nair, Game of Thrones, as the noble servant Tarak, Dunabe Kingdom as the cyborg swordmaster Nemesis, newcomer E. Duffy as Milius, Fra-Fee Hawkeye as Regent Belisarius, Corey Stoll Ant-Man as the Velt Patriarch Sindri, Ingvar Sigurdsson the Northman as Hagen, and newcomer Charlotte Maggi as Sam. Cast in undisclosed roles are Stuart Martin, Army of Thieves, Carrie Elwes, The Princess Bride, Alfonso Herrera, Ozark, Ryan Rees, Halloween, and Ray Porter, Zack Snyder's Justice League. Zack Snyder's penchant for grandiose storytelling is put on display in Rebel Moon, Part 1, A Child of Fire. The story is set in motion when a relatively tranquil colony on the edge of a galaxy is threatened by the vile Regent Belisarius. In a desperate attempt for redemption, habitants of the colony dispatch a young woman with a cryptic past to seek out warriors from neighboring planets to aid in the resistance. The producers for Rebel Moon, Part 1, A Child of Fire, are Zack Snyder along with Deborah Snyder and Eric Newman for his company Grand Electric. The epic sci-fi fantasy will be produced by Eric Newman, who produced Snyder's first feature debut, Deborah Snyder and Zack Snyder. The script for Rebel Moon is co-written by Kurt Johnstad, who worked on 300 with Snyder, and Shay Hatton, who also co-wrote with Snyder on The Army of the Dead. Snyder will also be handling the cinematography for the film, as he did with Army of the Dead. Tom Holkenberg, who worked with Snyder on Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, Zack Snyder's Justice League, and Army of the Dead, will be composing the film's score. Academy Award nominee Dodie Dorn, who also worked with Snyder on his last two films, will be editing the film. As mentioned earlier, Rebel Moon is broken up into two parts, with this first filming being part 1. Deborah Snyder did explain how the script went from being one film to two, saying, "While many of Zack Snyder's films have received R ratings, such as 300, Army of the Dead, and Watchmen, the initial release of Rebel Moon, Part 1, A Child of Fire, will be PG-13. The film officially received the rating in October 2023 for sequences of strong violence, sexual assault, bloody images, language, sexual material, and partial nudity. Zack Snyder is no stranger to extended cuts, and Rebel Moon will continue the tradition of the now iconic Snyder Cut. The director has revealed that R-rated versions of Rebel Moon Parts 1 and 2 will be available to stream, saying, "I went into a Rebel completely open to the possibility that it could be amazing, terrible, or anywhere in between, and I'm not influenced by any idiotic agenda or bias." On that note, a broken bar, yeah, this wasn't very good. Rebel takes place in a galaxy far, far away, but not a long time ago, where a government called the Mother World of rules with a tyrannical iron fist. Sofia Boutella is a former commander who now lives as a peaceful farmer until the Mother World visits her planet, led by Admiral Atticus Noble Edrin, when the Mother World declares that they will force the population to give up their harvest. Cora and her friend Gunnar Meal, who Iceman, venture out to recruit the warriors from other planets to help them fight back with the aid of a pilot and mercenary played by Charlie Hunnam. There's additional semi-complicated backstory, but it really doesn't matter. A Rebel Misa hodgepodge of roughly a dozen different sci-fi and fantasy trope instead of being woven together in any sort of smart or even organic way, are just clustered together, seemingly for the sake of having them. Initially, the story is interesting enough, if still not remarkable. You moderately care about Cora's village, as well as another side plot seemingly being built up involving a slave girl who befriends a robot servant, Anthony Hopkins. But once the quest gets going, any and all meaningful character building is blown up faster than Alder in a better sci-fi fantasy. That's not just Rebel Meadows to try a broken bar. I guess we get introductions to every warrior and ally that's recruited, and they're all given a somewhat interesting backstories, but they are as hollow and forgettable as you can imagine, because nothing from any sequences dedicated to them ever amounts to anything. These warriors get their moments to shine and then become one step above background characters. It feels like their very purpose for existing is to let the film pay tribute to other films and popular tropes, which would be fine as a few small winks and nods. But when the whole story is quest after quest after quest, with each one being just as irrelevant as the last, it all becomes white noise. The Creator, another original science fiction action film from earlier this year, also faced criticism for recycling familiar plot beats. And while that is an issue with that film, Adakita at least committed to fleshing out what it was working with and got us invested in its characters and world. Do a Rebelman doesn't even do that. Motivations and connections that were established minutes prior are treated like the most grandioperatic things you've ever seen. Djimon Hounsou plays one of the warriors, and he wants a wasted by having one well-acted scene before he's almost completely forgotten. There's apparently a love sub-boat, despite the two involved characters having zero romantic chemistry. But another character says there's a love subplot, so I guess it's there. Even Ka herself feels like a mere onlooker half the time. And Sofia Boutella's performance, while serviceable, doesn't do much to elevate the material, nor does Mitchell, who Icemans, and he's saddled with even weaker material. Array. Fisra, who plays another warrior, and a Charlie Hanima are the only two actors. On the heroes, and that stand out as truly engaging to watch. And obviously, Edrin is fun as the type of smarmy douche he could play in his sleep by now. But no actor has anything to work with beyond the outlines of what should have been much more interesting characters. I could see the potential of Farah Moon, but the script would have to be heavily reworked. Maybe the rebellion recruitment process could involve different forms of coercion or even manipulation. Maybe at least one character's past outside of course could actually matter. The endgame initially looks like it's going in a different direction than what I initially expected, only to then not take that big swing. The only praise I can give you, Rebel Moon's plot involves a third act surprise that I legitimately didn't see coming. I think the fact that it got me is more of a testament to one actor's performance, but I still like the idea, and wish it would have amounted to something more than an excuse for a climax and a cliffhanger for the next film. As a part one, I wouldn't say a Rebel feels like an unfinished story, but it's such an empty film that it doesn't feel like it turns it to be continued. I'm not at all anxiously waiting to see what happens next. Hell, I'm not even that eager to get more of this universe, which is a shame because there's clearly so much detail and work that went into bringing the universe to life. Some of the creature designs are very creative, and the visual effects are mostly really convincing. Every otherworldly creation moves in a tangible way, and by far the most praiseworthy thing in a Rebel Na is the juicy, earth-shattering sound mixing. The finale ends with the giant ship being taken down, and I've rarely felt the sheer destructive scale of such an event than here. The trademark Zack Snyder slow-motion shots and return, and I'm fine with them like I've always been. They would enhance the emotional power of specific moments if there was any emotional power to enhance. He still shoots his action mostly well, and it's deliciously brutal. Despite not being gory, my only small gripe is with how some parts of some shots look smudged. Not because of any focus-shifting tricks. It literally looks like someone rubbed their thumb on the lens and they didn't redo the takes. I know that's not what happened, though. That would be hilarious. But it's the only way I can think to describe what I was looking at. All in all, a Rabumna looks impressive and expensive as a whole, but it still isn't quite on par visually up with some of the other grand cinematic spectacles of recent years, including The Creator. I haven't seen all of Zack Snyder's films, but I've seen enough to know that his strengths lie in simplistic but grand visual storytelling, but that also means he's drawing dead if he doesn't have a meaty enough script to work with. But a Rebel Moon script is littered with meaningless copies of other film tropes. Empty character building, a story full of thin air, and even a handful of overly cheesy-on-the-nose dialogue. We name a calling dialogue on the nose. You know, it's bad. I just don't understand how Snyder thought this story was good enough to throw so much money and talent into it. I get the desire to create a wholly original science fiction universe, especially after the newly restored clout he's gotten in recent years. But unless he has something insanely brilliant in mind for part two, the stale juice really doesn't seem worth the squeeze here. Call me cynical, but I always find reviewing bad movies far more enjoyable than good ones. Dissecting Tommy Wise is a so bad it's good reverse masterpiece. Caper due to its unending stream of foiblesse. The chance to review Zack Snyder's new Netflix blockbuster, A Rebel Moon, was therefore not something I could pass up, having seen theata of dreadful reviews and the poor scores from a Rotten Diatasa 22% and the Medica 31%. The problem with this anti-genre is to do with intent. The rumor is funny because it wasn't meant to be the damnable dialogue written earnestly for what Wise hoped was a good film. A Rebel is another. The enjoyment I got from its scrapness does not detract from the blunt truth that the film is not good. One phrase summed up my thoughts after watching Jing through this film. Why? What was the point of it? Cinder's pet project defied cliché tilde copyright, and how cliché tilde copyright it was. Often my dad and I, with stunning success, found ourselves predicting characters' lines before they actually said them. The plot was staid, its story beats hitting with clockwork timing. The simple village folk of the rebel moon in question have their innocence shattered. As the evil empire threatens to blow them to smithereens, the film quickly becomes as the magnificent and Sofia in space as Sofia Boutella's anti-hero and protagonist Cora assembles a ragtag crew of reluctant adventurers to foil the comically wicked space fascist commander, played by a scene-chewing Eden Cora, along with Mashiel, who Iman's lunar bumpkin gunner resolved to gather a team to fight back, leading to a brain-melting slog consisting of meeting each character and convincing them to move the plot along. This culminates in a final showdown between Cora and Skrein's Attakis Noble. The only unexpected part about the 8 twists is how foreseeable they are. Charlie Hunnam's roguish Cadkai turns out to be a roguish cad and betrays our heroes. Attakis Noble survives the final fight and is revealed to be a pawn of the next film's antagonist, who himself raised Cora as an Imperial soldier before she defected to become a farmer on Belt. The characters are non-existent, with the center pulling the old trick of substituting meaningful character development with the tragic backstory. The obvious romantic subplot between Cora and Gunner, for example, has no impact when they are both so forgettable. A rebel is left with Palad, sketches of characters from other better films. If I seem uncharitable, it is because there really is vanishingly little that can be enjoyed in this film, if not through the lens of irony. Even the fight scenes, often what many look forward to in space opera, after wading through clunky exposition-laden dialogue, were just dull. Slow-mo used to great effect in film. Such a X-Men Days of Future Past was used here as a crutch, rendering all the fights uniform and uninteresting. I hear your cries of protest. You're not meant to take it seriously. This kind of film is a fun, brainless romp told the law marvel. Sadly not. Snyder's offerings were notably lighter than its rival on humor. And this film takes that lack of levity even further. I can't remember one joke throughout its hefty 2-hour and 14-minute runtime. Don't get me wrong, like everyone else in my generation, I am tired of the lazy millennials' quips that prevail in blockbusters. Serious films given space to be serious, like IA, Oppenheimer, or Joker, have proven they can achieve stellar success with audiences and critics alike. Buddha. Rebel Na is not a serious film. While Snyder clearly tried hard to upgrade the movie to a more adult version of fast Star Wars, with the supposedly morally muddled protagonists and implications of sexual violence in an early scene, it cannot escape its absurd premise. The film's heaviness weighs it down rather than giving it an added punch. Watching it feels like a chore with no reward. I have never courted popularity in tones John Cleese and Amadi Python's Flying Circus sketch about a homicidal stock. If Netflix viewing figures are anything to go by, my scathing acid for Snyder's movie will not resonate with public opinion. A Reball topped the charts for Netflix in the coveted post-Christmas week, and its audience scores have far exceeded of the consensus from critics. Some fans even took to social media to demand an extended edition. A Rebel is basically enjoyable if you switch your brain off, but we deserve better blockbuster movies. While not every sci-fi has to be the strange, uncomfortable, and masterful of 2001, A Space Odyssey, for example, light entertainment should bring something new and original to the table. If you want a rubbish film to while away a few hours and some chuckles at inept dialogue, then Rebel Moon is worth a watch. But I've had my fill. What does it mean that Zack Snyder's Rebel was this week sitting pretty at the top of the Netflix top 10? Other than that, viewers of the app will watch pretty much anything. This is, after all, the streaming service that gave Adam Sandler, the actor-producer behind such totems of modern cinema as Jack and Jill, I now pronounce you Chuck and Larry and grown-ups, to a multiple movie contract as far back as 2014. One of the films that sprang fully formed from that deal like a putrid zombie Hydra head was 2015's Exactly the Ridiculous Six, which boasts an impressive 0% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. But boy, was it popular. Maybe these guys just know their audience. I should point out that there is also a considerable amount of excellent material. And on Netflix, the streaming service often seems to be interested in movies that people are likely to watch casually at least once, as much as those they will view a dozen times, recommend to friends, and generally bind to their own personal cultural carabase for the next decade or so, which is perhaps where Snyder comes in. Ever since the U.S. filmmaker delivered Watchmen in 2009, it has been pretty much downhill as far as the critics have been concerned. Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice 2016 made more than $800 million at the global box office, but was vilified by reviewers as an overhyped, knuckle-headed, ultra-violent marketing exercise that completely misunderstood superhero world-building. And even more essentially, Batman himself, Sucker Punch 2011, had earlier been called out for its obsession with style over substance, while Man of Steel 2013, an animated fantasy legend of the Guardians, the Owls of Gil, both met with a rousing chorus of M.A. Rebel Moon. A Part 1, A Child of Fiery, has received the worst reviews of Snyder's career. A trailer for sequel Rebel Moon, a Part 2, the Skrein dropped this week with the movie to debut in April. Somehow Snyder, out of the ashes of the finally dead DC Extended Universe, seems to have built an army of slavering fans on social media who will support anything he brings to the table. This must be perfect for Netflix, which ultimately needs constant new content to encourage subscribers to keep hitting the play button. Whether it's Oscars bait or selling Sunset, has Snyder simply become a like Sandler? Before him, acrylic proof. There are very few filmmakers who can defy terrible or middling reviews for more than a few movies. But here is one who, other than has a surprisingly good Justice League director's cut, hasn't really made a critically well-received film in more than a decade, and yet still seems to be going stronger than ever. Rebel Moon is little more than an expensively configured, gorgeous-looking, but ultimately soulless Star Wars ripoff. Yet there seems to be every chance that a Netflix-backed Snyder will get to see his vision of Faye, a multimedia space franchisee to rival the one once cooked up by George Lucas, becoming reality. Even more intriguingly, last week a Christopher Nolan suggested that his one-time collaborator on Man of Steel should be recognized as a seminal influence on comic book movies. There's no superhero science fiction film coming out these days where I don't see some influence of Zack. A Nolan told The Atlantic, which labeled Snyder the director people love to hate in a comprehensive profile piece. When you watch a Zack Snyder film, you see and feel his love for the potential of cinema, the potential of it to be fantastical, to be heightened in its reality, but to move you and to excite you. Nobody is denying that Snyder is capable of visually splendid segues, such as the bravier extended opening of Watchmen, his eye-popping, hypertense, slow-mo recreation of Batman's parents' death in Dawn of Justice, or the naggin-bogling cosmic wonder of those early sections on Krypton in Man of Steel. But honestly, if Nolan thinks this is enough to elevate his fellow filmmaker to legendary status in the comic book movie of Ra, one has to respectfully question if the esteemed director of the Dark Knight trilogy has particularly elevated expectations of the genre in 2023. Still, numbers do the talking, and the numbers say that everyone is watching Rebel Moon. If Nolan and 24 million Netflix viewers can't be wrong, it looks as if we should prime ourselves for plenty more Neo de Azat's lightsaber adventures across the cosmos for years to come. Perhaps by the law of averages, if Snyder keeps making these things, he will eventually deliver a good one. And if not, well, that's the why thing about streaming. There's always something else to watch. Your investment in Zack Snyder's creative vision will likely determine how badly you need to see the outrated director's cut of Rebel Moon, Snyder's grim Netflix space opera adventure. This new director's cut adds 120 minutes of footage, including a numbing wealth of computer-animated gore and a bit more sex. Some of this new material adjusts without significantly enhancing Snyder's stamp at the Star Wars-style sci-fi pastiche and an overextended update of Seven Samurai. That mainly takes place on the storyboard perfect farm planet of Delta. Some new scenes add more information about the characters' motives, while others extend already lifeless action. Sequences. This new material usually only lets the previous version's footage play out slower. In its new form, Rebel Moon now seems mediocre where it used to be outright bad. A frequently monotonous fable that confuses volume with intensity and generally resembles cutscenes from a video game that you'll never get to play, where the previous release of Rebel Moon sometimes sped through superfluous flashbacks. This new director's cut wades through them while still being over-reliant on lean expository dialogue and full lyrical voiceover narration. Now we get to spend more time with the robot warrior JC-1435, voiced by Anthony Hopkins, who mostly watches and frets over the people of Belt as they prepare to fight the implacable space fascist Admiral Noble Edrin and an inexhaustible army of Nazi-looking Imperium soldiers. There's also more backstory connecting Noble with Cora Sofia about a mysterious orphan hiding out on Velt. Cora leads a group of cast-off fighters, including former Imperium General Titus, Djimon Hounsou, and cyborg swordsperson Nemesis Dunai in protecting Belt from Noble. Everybody good, then Rebel Moon has lost somebody that they've loved, usually because they had no other choice but to either kill for or be killed by the Imperium. Now they kill the Imperium soldiers with impunity, even the few who express misgivings, and especially that one guy who in the movie's second half begs to be spared for the sack of his wife and children. He gets shot in the face, and so do a few other Imperium soldiers, many of whom get pumped full of holes with laser guns in slow motion. Noble also betrays a few more of his informants and allies, presumably establishing how badly he and the Imperium need to be stopped. It's still hard to understand why we need to see the same process of collaboration and violent betrayal play out so many times, and at such punishing length in Rebel Moon, as if repetition necessarily added meaning instead of just extra steps. Rebel Moon's grisly action scenes remain pretty monotonous, featuring way too many stock poses and gestures, and at such length that even die-hard fans will likely wonder why so much dramatic shorthand was used. Too much money's on the screen for the movie's big fight scenes to be flat-out ugly. Still, there are only so many times that you can be impressed by turgid, bloodletting rot by stick-figure heroes whose physical movements are never graceful or well choreographed enough to warrant so much slow motion. Everything blends together, often literally given the ice training, soft-focus camera work, and butter-colored lenses. Only the most hardcore Snyder fans will care about what happens to protagonists who explain away their personalities rather than embody them through their behavior. Stunted by Snyder's literal-minded reproduction-heavy imagination, Rebel Moon lacks the sort of emotional inflection needed to justify its indulgent length. There are some additional stabs at a topical, timely subtext to the movie's hemiant anti-fascist parable in this new director's cut, particularly whenever a supporting character forgives one of the leads for doing whatever they must to survive. It's also pretty telling that the best new material in this new release of Rebel Moon is an extended sex scene in Chapter 2. A relatively tender reunion for Cora and her meek farmer bow gunner Machil Heisman. Sadly, Cora and Gunner's sex doesn't match the tone or style of the movie, since it presents the two leads as human-scaled individuals, instead of overinflated effigies of suffering and badass revantism. More of everything doesn't otherwise enhance this new version of Rebel Moon, whose shameless and uninspired cribbing from superior films soon makes 6+ hours seem interminable. The best scenes remain the ones that don't revolve around people. I said it before, but I maintain that Snyder's latest only really sings when big objects are either exploding or crashing into other large things. The director's cut of Rebel Moon features the same imaginative shortcomings as the last edition. Its champion Joyless will never be more than the sum of its well-oiled parts, a feature-length mood board for Snyder and his collaborators, and a pretty slow for everyone else. Welcome back, loyal readers, to the second half of my review of Zack Snyder's sci-fi fantasy epic, A Rebel Moon. Last December, I reviewed the first installment of the two-part film, A Child of Fire. And to briefly summarize my thoughts, I found it to be incredibly dull and greatly disappointing. In fact, when all was said and done, I had it ranked as the second worst of all the 2023 new releases I watched last year. Needless to say, I didn't exactly have high expectations that Snyder would be able to turn things around. Dina Part 2, the Skara, and inspire any hope that his new wannabe franchise is one that will be worth keeping an eye on in this first part of Rebel Moon. Our hero Korra, Sofia Boutella, fugitive daughter of the Mother World's tyrannical, desperate Bellosaurus Francis Fee, teamed up with the humble farmer Gunnar Mashiel, who Iceman, to protect the agrarian, vaguely Nordic moon belt from her father's armies to do so. They teamed up with Nemesis Dooner by a cyborg adept with plasma swords, Milius Elise Duffier, generic soldier Titus Djimon Hounsou, a former Imperial general turned generic soldier with a penchant for motivational speeches, and Tara Stas, Naira nobleman with the completely unutilized ability to communicate with animals, who against all odds functions as yet another generic soldier. Together, this ragtag group of heroes is able to battle the forces of the Mother World and seemingly kill Admiral Noble at Skrein, right-hand man of Bellosaurus, grinding peace to the vet. People of Belt. Early on, Ina the Scariver, both the audience and heroes, learned that Noble was not in fact killed, and that he and the Imperial Army will be returning to try and capture Korra and attack Felt. The first half of the film is spent preparing for inevitable battle, harvesting grain, training the villagers to fight, and monologuing around a fire pit so that each character can explicitly lay down their motivations. In the second half, the army arrives at Belt, and we finally get the battle that Snyder has been building towards for over 3 hours now, but much like with the first half of For Real Moon, my biggest complaint to Levy against Thea the Skara is that it is dreadfully boring. About halfway through the film, my wife asked me to take a break and help clean the bathrooms as we were having some guests over later that night. This was a more enjoyable experience than any minute I had spent watching the film up to that point. The first half in particular is a slog, as it's largely filled with exposition and montages of preparation, hardly providing any action or drama to keep the viewer engaged. The second half, on the other hand, is stuffed to the brim with action, and although I'll admit that some of the sequences are fun to watch, the lack of investment I had in the characters or story made it hard to care about what was happening on the screen. With any team-up movie, the ID7 Samurai, The Avengers, or Ocean's 11, one of my favorite parts is seeing how everyone's different skill sets and backgrounds can come together to form one cohesive team. In A Rebel Moon, with the exception of Nemesis, who uses swords instead of guns, no character feels like they bring any particular expertise to the table despite their different backgrounds. When push comes to shove, every other member of the band of heroes is just a soldier with a gun, none having any more reason to be on the screen than any of the random farmers of Belt defending their homes. The most interesting character in the series, a robot named Jimmy Anthony Hopkins, who's sworn to protect a royal family which no longer exists, only appears in a couple scenes. Now donning a pair of elantlers, for no discernible reason, Jimmy pops up to give Korra a pep talk, and again later to help in the battle. And while I enjoyed his contributions and Hopkins' vocal performance, I wished he could have been a more integral part of the team. Snyder certainly has an eye for visual flair, and despite my issues with the story and writing in both parts of Far Rebel Moon, his style is present in abundance. As I said before, there are moments during the battle that I genuinely enjoyed, be it because of a well-shot stunt sequence or interesting visual effects. Speaking of the effects, I found them to be pretty solid throughout the film. This is certainly an effects-heavy project with a lot of sci-fi action, and I don't recall a single moment when anything felt out of place in the world. Like with any Snyder project, there's also a large amount of slow-motion shots and sequences. We get slow-mo explosions, slow-mo sword fights, slow-mo jumping and falling, and even an extended slow-mo sequence of grain harvesting. Some of this is fun and adds a lot to the action, but a lot of times it does feel over the top and gratuitous. So do as a Rebun work as a single 4+ hour sci-fi epic. Well, number, although I did enjoy the second half of the film more than the first, in large part due to the climactic battle. I can't imagine anyone having the patience to sit through 3 hours of build-up and exposition to get to that point. Zack Snyder is certainly a talented cinematographer, but I really question his abilities as a writer and his restraint as a director. Against all odds, if Netflix greenlights the other 4 films that Snyder supposedly has planned for this universe, I hope that he has the humility to step back and let someone else refine his story, as that's the only chance I think it has at improving. A Rebel Moon Part 2, the Skarjira, is an empty feast. It's a relentless onslaught of explosions, sci-fi tropes, and meaningless exposition that amounts to nothing. And yet somehow it's still better than this first film and Zack Snyder's wannabe sci-fi epic franchise for Netflix, A Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. What do these titles really mean? Who cares? With all of the doll table setting complete, Snyder is able to let his true talent serene A Rebel Moon Part 2A by delivering endless battles filled with slow-motion action and heroic poses. It looks cool. I just wish it added up to something. Anything if you somehow missed the first Rebel film. The basic setup is that it's a Star Wars Amitz of the Seven Samurai, a Sophie, about T-Stars as Korra, a former elite soldier of an evil empire who is hiding out in an all-too-idyllic farming village, just planting and harvesting her days away. When a group of military baddies kills the chief of the village and starts threatening a young girl, Korra goes on a murdering spree, in defense, leaving the community open to a retaliatory attack. She spends the first movie recruiting potential warriors to defend the village, including a fallen gladiator, Djimon Hounsou, and a badass swordswoman, Dunai. Their names are Titus and Nemesis, respectively, but those don't really matter because the characters are paper thin. Full disclosure, I tried writing a review for the first The Rebel Ma and just gave up in disgust. It was a shockingly boring epic, so much so that it took me several days to watch without falling asleep. By the end, I was only left with a feeling of dread, knowing that there was still another 2 hours of Farumna ahead of me. It's somewhat attempty praise, but at least I didn't fall asleep during a discard shiver. Mostly that's due to the film, actually, having a sense of momentum and a lot more action. You can turn off your brain and enjoy the pretty pictures much like you could for Snyder's A Sucker Punch, Justice League Aya, and a Watch Mina adaptation. He's more a stylist than a natural storyteller, but occasionally Snyder's visuals, such as a baffling montage of our heroes harvesting wheat, can be almost poetic. It's just a shame that I didn't care much about the film's characters or any aspect of its story. James Gunn's Guardians of the Galaxy, a trilogy, made us fall in love with the band of misfits and screw-ups with storylines that directly led to their personal and emotional growth. The crew in A Rebel Noon instead feel like cardboard cutouts from better movies, and the overall plot feels forced. There's even setup for another film by the end. Hounsou tries to sell the paws of Titus with his eyes, but he can only do so, and while B's warrior woman exudes cool and has a very compelling flashback, she's mostly wasted when the action really heats up. Then there's Jimmy, a robot voiced by Anthony Hopkins, who was briefly introduced in the first film and pops up for a few minutes here to kick butt. Why? It doesn't matter. Somehow that character is also important enough to serve as the narrator for both the Rebel films. But really, it seems Snyder just wanted Hopkins' voice adding gravities. Perhaps the only real saving grace for a Rebel Moon Part 2. Much like the first film, A is Ed Skrein is the villainous Atticus Noble. As a sadistic baddie, he's really nothing new. But Skrein's heightened scenery chomping makes the character interesting to watch, where Darth Vader exudes a calm sense of dread. Skrein's Noble is entertainingly chaotic, like the Joker crossed with Christoph Waltz's Hans Land of Roma and Glorious Bastards. He just has a lot of fun being bad. Hey, that's something given how popular the first film was, according to Snyder and Netflix. Anyway, we'll likely see Moria Rebel down the line. Snyder previously said he'd like to do a 6-hour director's cut of both films, and he recently told the Radio Times that he'd like to stretch the Rebel Mess series out to 4 or 6 films. Somehow that just feels like a threat. I can't fathom the amount of movie reviews I've written for the Pop break during my time as film editor. A editor's note, 83 pieces altogether. Yes, there were some gems, but there's a lot of battle scars, and I still wake up in cold sweats at some horrendous movie as out of all my reviews. The one that probably gets mentioned the most, and the one I've been absolutely skewered, mocked, ridiculed, called an idiot, and ripped apart for most of all eyes of have Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, directed by Zack. It's for this reason I felt a responsibility to dust off the old critic hat and review what has been described as Zack Snyder's as Star Wars. The original Star Wars trilogy are my 3 favorite films ever. However, a Star Wars has gone from the ultimate movie-going event to the equivalent of preseason game between the Arizona Cardinals and Washington Commanders that runs at 2:30 a.m. on ESPN 47. So when the director of Famine of Stila was basically going to cut and paste a Star Wars movie he pitched and morph it into an original project, it was intriguing. I've been so desperate for a Star Wars to be epic, grand, and important again, so I was willing to settle for a Star Wars movie that's not even a Star Wars movie. And the fact that it was Snyder doing it put a smirk on my face just because of how much eye-rolling this movie was going to be met. Now, having said all that, let me be very clear. My expectations were moderate alone. Yes, I definitely like Snyder films more than most, but the immediate red flag for me was that Snyder himself was credited as a screenwriter. My least favorite Snyder movies have always been the ones he's had a hand in writing. A Last Sucker Punch, his best movies, like A Man of Stila and Watchmen, and even a BVS. He is not credited as a screenwriter, and after watching this, it's pretty evident that Zack Snyder is great at adapting material, but he sure as hell shouldn't be writing it. A Rabumna encapsulates every criticism Snyder has endured throughout his career. It really pains me to say this as a Snyder defender, but yeah, a broken bar. That sentence can basically be the review for this movie. You can stop reading now. There really isn't a whole lot to say here if you're a Snyder hater. A Rebel Mina is pure candy for you. Now, is the movie as awful as the current Rotten Tomato scaria would suggest? No, it's really not. We'll get to the positives in a bit, but at the end of the day, this movie is weak in all the places a movie should be strongest, a story and character. This is exactly the movie you think it is. It's the kind of sci-fi idea that would be laughed out of the room if you pitched it in a screenwriting class. Yeah, and then this happens, and this guy shoots a laser gun. There's an alien with a big face, and then there's a giant ladybug who crawls into this guy, and it makes him talk, and then there's a giant spider with a human head, and that head has like other faces on it and stuff. Seriously, all that stuff happened. What should we attack first? Hey, let's go with the story. If it's indeed true that Snyder did actually pitch this to Disney as a Star Wars project, it's completely understand why it got rejected. So there's an oppressive government, and it wants to take control of all these planets, but there's a rebellion. Zack, a broken bar. No offense, but that's been covered. So that's the plot of Farble Moon. This was going to be a miss in the first 10 seconds. Anthony Hopkins, who sounds like he's reading his narration while waiting for a bus, spouts off a Bunch of incoherent blah 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 about Mother World's kings getting slayed, etc. Nobody cares. It's horrifically bad writing. If I listened to that narration 50 more times, I still wouldn't get it. Here's what you need to know. A, there's a farming planet. Sound familiar? And the big mean heads of the universe want to take it over. But a fierce warrior with the mysterious past goes off-world to gather a rebellion to fight back. When I read Zack Snyder had his own version of Fast Star Wars, I wanted to believe he was bringing something unique and original to the table. But this is so bare bones and cliche till the copyright. It's just sad. And please don't ask me to remember the name of the farm planet or look it up, please. All the planet names run together. They just flash onto the screen and are complete sci-fi gibberish. For all I know, one of them could have been called Darrell Island or something. Then there are the characters. Oh wait, there are none. They are all interchangeable. Every single character and actor, and I don't even know who was who, just looks at the camera, intensely reads the most banal, uninspired, stilted cookie cutter dialogue in the history of writing, and that's it. It's almost as if Snyder was admitting how lazy his characters were, as he literally has a scene where the villain reads off every single character's detailed backstory just so we can differentiate them. It doesn't help. The one actress who separates herself from the pack is our main hero. Cora, played by Sofia Boutella, as she's a solid anchor. There's nothing on the page, but at least she lasers through the camera with some charisma. Now, even if you're a Snyder hater, you can't deny this. Say, per usual, he delivers a visually stunning product. He may not know how to write, but man, can this guy deliver eye candy. In an age where visual effects, especially in recent superhero movies, look like sprinkles from Cold Stone Quarry, great visual effects shouldn't be taken for granted. The movie really does draw you in visually. It looks clean, crisp, and distinctive. The Netflix budget definitely shines through. At the end of the day, this movie is what's stated in the headline. A, it's just boring. This is what you call a time checker movie. Yeah, there are cool environments, and I perked up at little moments, but they are far and few between. We all know Snyder can deliver awesome action, but honestly, that was even lackluster here. There are some decent gunfights and swordplay, but it's pretty underwhelming. And the climax is a weak as hell. Wow, crumbling under the weight of its own visionary grandiosity, Zack Snyder's A Rebel Knob is a series of amazing-looking sets and costumes and effects, looking for a story, characters, emotion, or really anything that might raise the pulse. Maybe part of that is due to the fact that this, like so many other movies nowadays, is a Part 1, a subtitled A Child of Fire, which could mean that the real fireworks will come in the next installment. But the film's constant missed opportunities suggest otherwise, as it lumbers from uninspiring set piece to uninspiring set piece with little drama, charm, or personality. The background of Quarry actually presented some cause for optimism. Director Snyder apparently pitched the idea initially to Lucasfilm as a Star Wars project. They said no, but he made it anyway. A4, Netflix, changing little more than a few proper names along the way, that's a great Zack Snyder story. I may not love the man's movies, but I do admire his that doggedness. The film even begins in a Star Wars a wife fashion with some belabored narration from Anthony Hopkins, giving us the portentous backstory of the Mother World, a planet of decadent kings and queens who used up all their resources and now send imperial dreadnoughts into the far reaches of space to mine and plunder other worlds. Of course, in George Lucas's original Star Wars movies, such opening information presented as an on-screen crawl occupied a middle ground between pomposity and cheese, their floorport, and tempered by the fact that they were in the end giant birds flying through space to the operatic strains of John Williams' brass. First things first, I did not hate our Doth. Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. Hey, I didn't love it. I didn't hate it. I came away from the movie with mixed feelings. Then again, I have mixed feelings about the first Star Wars A-Tret, which I do love, but which is undeniably a rough draft of what George Lucas and his collaborators eventually came up with across the original trilogy. Rebel Na is not a trilogy, and that's my first complaint. I am not a fan of these two-part movies. A movie should be one film or three films. Two is an awkward number, especially for what is obviously intended to be a major space opera epic. Too much and too little were attempted and achieved in part one. The pacing is a mess. It moves too slowly, much of the time, yet the story of the important pieces like character development are rushed through and glossed over. My second complaint is that so much of the movie makes so little sense. Yes, I can understand how a giant space empire needs food to feed it. Soldiers. No, I can't see how a group of 5 or 6 warriors, even supplemented with 3 or 4 squads of rebel fighters, will be able to fight off a massive dreadnought ship and its battalions of all-armed troops. I like the twist and the betrayal toward the end of the movie, but I thought the means by which our heroes escape quite preposterous. Who designed those scorpion chair robots? They're very cool, but ... Why would you make the paralyzing device the same as a key? And how would a farmer gunner know that? It would have made more sense for Kai to be playing a deeper, twistier game here. Rebel Moon Part 1A functions like the beginning of F7 Samurai AI or the Magnificent Savina or well at the Three Amigos. A village comes under threat by a powerful enemy and a group of rough around the edges. Heroes are gathered to help the villagers fight back. The problem here is scale. If Snyder had made the enemy a group of space pirates or some kind of evil space biker gang or something, fine. Even just a local officer manning this planet who cracks down to forcefully, but we're talking about a massive multi-star system force that's conquered known space and is willing to throw all its might at these villagers. I don't buy it. The actual gathering of the heroes is also poorly paced. We get a massively extended scene of Tarak braking and then riding a space griffin with lots of Snyder slow-mo to slow things down further to warn straight out of the Harry Potter hypograph scenes. But then when they find General Titus, a slubbingly drunk but still ripped, it's one motivational speech and off we go. Rebel Moon Part 1A functions like the beginning of FA7 Samurai AI or the Magnificent Savina or well at the Three Amigos. A village comes under threat by a powerful enemy and a group of rough around the edges. Heroes are gathered to help the villagers fight back. The problem here is scale. If Snyder had made the enemy a group of space pirates or some kind of evil space biker gang or something, fine. Even just a local officer manning this planet who cracks down to forcefully, but we're talking about a massive multi-star system force that's conquered known space and is willing to throw all its might at these villagers. I don't buy it. The actual gathering of the heroes is also poorly paced. We get a massively extended scene of Tarak braking and then riding a space griffin with lots of Snyder slow-mo to slow things down further to warn straight out of the Harry Potter hippogriff scenes. But then when they find General Titus, a slovenly drunk now but still ripped, it's one motivational speech and off we go. I could go on and on about all the little things that didn't make sense in this movie, but the long and short of it is simple. With a little more time and a stronger script, this could have been a tremendous space opera. Instead, it was merely enjoyable. I didn't find it half so terrible as the reviews made it sound all the worst movies ever. Talk seems rather over the top and breathless to me. In fact, I'd say I like this more than any of Snyder's films since the old days. Zofa 300, watch Mina and the Dawn of the Dead. Assure it's derivative. So I say Star Wars. Hey, I'm fine with derivative, especially in the sword and planet genre. John Carter was around long before a Dune. I don't begrudge Frank Herbert for riffing off of Edgar Rice Burroughs, or George Lucas riffing off of Herbert and Akira Sawa, or Zack Snyder riffing off all of the above. I've had my own ideas for Sword and Planet, and samurai stories were all influenced by a million things. The problem with the Rebel Knob is that it doesn't do enough to establish itself as something unique and coherent. Maybe that will change when we have Part 2, but I wish Snyder had come up with some better hooks, some more obvious ways to make this universe special and distinct rather than just a hodgepodge of other people's ideas. And yet at the same time, it felt mostly very capable as a somewhat darker Ajira Star Wars, a wooden characters and flimsy plot aside. I enjoyed the action and was mostly entertained throughout. If anything, it suffered from many of the same problems the sequel trilogy suffered from, which were often pacing issues. Recall the original Star Wars trilogy did such a great job at two things. First, it gave us great characters we cared about. Second, it spent meaningful time establishing a sense of place in each of its films. We got to know planets like Tatooine, Dagobah, Hoth, the Moon of Endor, the Death Star, Cloud City, and so forth. In the sequel trilogy, and Dina Rebel Moon are the places we go are barely established at all and utterly forgettable. The characters have potential, but we hardly scratch the surface. Still, I like them for the most part. I like Sofia Boutella's Korra. I almost titled this review at The Legend of Korra, though I wish Snyder had picked better ways to reveal her past to us than long exposition latent flashbacks. Charlie Hunnam's Kai was a lot of fun, though he, like all the others, gets a little lost in the mix of introducing so many characters in so short the span. The robot Jimmy is an instant favorite thanks to the wonderful voice work from Anthony Hopkins. More Jimmy, please. Jim Hanser's General Titus didn't get enough screen time at all. Perhaps half of these characters should have been introduced in the second movie in the fictional trilogy. I wish this was Enmil Hu Iman's gunner and Baiduna's sword-wielding nemesis, not to mention the surprisingly sympathetic Spider-Man lady she fights. Edron makes a terrific villain as Admiral Atekis Noble, even if he is a walking cliché and a better dressy to Star Wars Imperial. Meanwhile, the special effects, sound design, costumes, and cinematography were all top-notch. I really like this film's take on laser blasters, which pop holes right through people. Nemesis's swords aren't quite lightsabers, though they looked like that in the trailer. Rather, they're normal swords that heat up into glowing fire blades. I just wish that all this attention to detail had been given a little more room to Bradia, which is a sentiment I hold toward the characters and the dialogue as well. I suppose much of my enjoyment here is probably due to the exceptionally low expectations I came into the movie with. I was fully expecting it to be dreadful at every turn, but it was more like a fast food cheeseburger. Not bad, really, just nothing particularly unique and not the type of burger you'd get on a date. I enjoy a fast food burger from time to time, though it can really hit the spot. Rebel Miss Scratch That Space Opera did when that movie came out and bombed with critics and audiences, and it did it without the Force. It's no hander by any means, but it's really no worse than the Star Wars sequel trilogy, and I enjoyed it more than the prequels. At least there's no Jar Jar Binks. I'm definitely going to watch Part 2, and I'm genuinely curious to see what happens. I'll probably even watch the director's cut when that comes out, though it should have just been that version from the start, for goodness sakes, which is something I didn't have the stomach for with the Justice League. I can honestly say that I was excited to see Rebel Moon when I first heard about Zack Snyder's rejected Star Wars story repurposed into his own unique world building. After my appreciation of Snyder's original vision of the Justice League movie that was unjustly tainted by the studio, I was on board to see what he could do with his own original IP. Needless to say, when the PG-13 version was presented on Netflix last year, I was met with disappointment as the story elements weren't well executed, along with action scenes that you can tell were meant to be R-rated, and some character design choices that were, let's say, a broken bar, not so subtle. In fact, I was so disappointed that I didn't even waste my time watching the PG-13 version of Part 2, but now we have the R-rated director's cut. Snyder's original vision was officially brought to light, chock full of blood, boobs, and no words. So, does the R-rated version make these movies better? In a way, the R-rated director's cut versions are definitely better than the originally released PG-13 versions, which does beg the question as to why Netflix didn't just release the R-rated version in the first place. However, all the issues that people had with these films are still very much present. Yes, there are a lot of new scenes presented in these versions, and they do add a few things to the story, but these extra scenes don't improve the overall story. That much, in my personal opinion. The original versions were known as Part 1, The Child of Fire, and Part 2, Scar Shiver. The titles have now officially been changed for the director's cut versions. They are now known as Part 1, Chalice of Blood, and Part 2, The Curse of Forgiveness. I personally think that the titles before better, because after watching the new versions, I don't think the new titles make much sense to the stories. From what I recall, there is no MacGuffin called the Chalice of Blood, although one character did refer to someone as a chalice of something else, but not blood, in The Curse of Forgiveness. I can kind of see as many characters state forgiveness to a character just before executing them, so that makes a little more sense. Fun fact, I never watched the original version of Rebel Moon Part 2. After being disappointed with the original version of Part 1, and with all the negative reviews surrounding it, I felt it better that I didn't waste my time, so instead I waited, not really, for the director's cut version to be released so that I could spend 6.5 hours watching both. So everything presented in Part 2 was brand new to me. I will say that the excessive violence did make the movie a lot more interesting to watch. Lots of blaster impacts that were super bloody, headshots some of the most brutal when you can see a new crater where a face used to be. There was also a lot of sexuality and nudity in these new versions. There was one sex scene in particular in Part 2 that went on a little bit too long, to the point where I started asking myself, are they filming a movie or a softcore porno? Let's wrap this scene up already. And there was one scene involving the villain in Part 1 that was so widely weird that I literally do not have the words to describe it, but you'll know it when you see it. Overall, the director's cut versions of Rebel Moon are an improvement over the original versions, but the issues that they've held are still very much present. From the overused slow-motion shots of everything from action scenes to the harvesting of grains, it does feel like it's becoming too much usage and should probably be used more sparingly. The overall story is still not the best. So much so, in fact, that you can see why Lucasfilm didn't want it to be part of their Star Wars brand. Acting is nothing noteworthy, but even with all that being said, the director's cut versions are this reviewer's preferred versions. Snyder made the movies that he wanted to make, and I will always applaud one for seeking to bring their vision to life. And if they're successful, there is a high chance that there will be more in the future. So if you are a fan of Rebel Moon, the director's cut versions of Part 1 and 2 should provide a whole new viewing experience that will send you to the moon. Rebel Moon has sucked gallons of ass. I was prepared for something like Zack Sender and steroids with the scale of a big-budget studio tentpole, but a grimmer, bloodier tone. I was not prepared for a 2-hour movie as stupid and unengaging as Netflix's direct-to-memory whole-release Heart of Stone, unlike that. Insipid Gala vehicle Aribumna has aspirations of being a real movie, and despite the aggressive emptiness of releases like A Red Notice at a Gray Man, or Heart of Stone, Netflix can do real movies. The Gilra and The Fair Play are both stylish, cohesive films you could have fun within, and IRL 4-Wall Theater. A Rebel NI in 70mm at the Paris is no more substantial than a Rebel Na on your cracked iPhone screen hunched forward on the toilet. I avoided reading too much about the film before I saw it, but I knew Snyder had pitched it to Lucasfilm as a grown-up spin in a Star Wars. I also knew that, like Star Wars, he envisioned it as the jumping off point for a massive hype and a universe that can be built out. I think it's a bad sign when stories are treated as intellectual properties first and foremost, and you get films too busy with setting up a future franchise to create a self-sufficient experience. Still, in the same interview, he emphasized Akira Kurosawa and the Star Wars saw inspirations behind the Rebel Moon. So, it was possible we could still get something good. Hey yo, Jimbo on Yavin. 4. I don't mind when my blockbusters are derivative, and you could do worse than restaging a Rashomon on Hoth or whatever, but I don't think Snyder understands why people like a Star Wars and Kurosawa do a Rebel Moon. Part 1, A Child of Fiery feels like rejected expanded universe material, penned by someone to read a Seven Samurai Criterion collection description. All he took from those films was how cool violence can look on screen. Snyder is film A, and we can call it a Heisa film since he got to make this doozy with little studio oversight or input. Really wants people to think it's an epic. The narrative take as a Seven Samurais. Let's round up some Ron and set up and stretches it across and now. Intergalactic Empire, allowing its ragtag gang of stoical cutouts to visit a procession of washed-out one-note. Locals. The death culty fetish for violence that runs throughout his era is anathema to the kind of levity and character moments that endeared Luke Han and Leia to generations of moviegoers. Previous theatrical blockbusters of his, like I Watch Mina and The Man of Steel, were premised on being darker, edgier takes on their genres. His 2021 zombie movie Army of the Dead was most notable for its horrific bloodshed and 148 minute runtime. Not unlike Star Wars, a Rebel aims for a mythic archetypic tone, but its cast lacks the charm and chemistry of the original trilogy's crew, and its narrative never achieves the kind of grandeur or inspiration that deserves the name space opera. The result is a ploddingly predictable story about people you feel nothing for. Before the plot begins, we get a vaguely Star Wars-like expository chunk. The stock space operatic empire, the Mother World, has been destabilized by the slaughter of its royal family. The stock rebel forces have attempted to strike while the regime is weak. In response, its enormous military, the Imperium, embarks on a campaign of renewed violence and cruelty. The exposition itself is short, but prepare to hear it 6 more times. The film proper opens on Cora Sophie about Ella plowing a field. With the help of an alien horse, a huge Saturnine planet hangs in the red sky. Though her past is a mystery, Cora's adopted home is a close-knit idyllic farming community on the edge of the Gi, Imperium's domain. Their faintly sketched peace is shattered when an Imperium dreadnought descends on the town. Admiral Atticus Noble Edrin shows up in a Nazi haircut, kills the local patriarch, and demands an exorbitant amount of the upcoming harvest, enough to leave the community starving. Space. Richard Spencer Spacer announces he'll return in 10 weeks for his grain. Don't worry, there's no countdown. They'll never reference this timeline again. He leaves behind enough soldiers to terrorize the town's folk in the meantime. And after they try to gang rape a blonde girl in 2023's most rollingly tasteless presentation of ancrine sexual violence, Cora reluctantly decides to raise a force to fight off the Imperium. Cora and boy next door Gunnar Mitchell, who Iceman, travel to the port city of Providence, not Rhode Island, alas, where they hope to make contact with the rebels. Providence certainly has Ajadiki vibe to its architecture, which makes it the only visually compelling environment in the film. Savor it after a cheap gay panic bit. Cora and Gunnar shack up with I Can't Believe He's Not Han Solo. A sends Kai, Charlie Hannam, a mischievous mercenary with the spaceship and the Rolodex of anti-Imperium sympathizers. If you guess, Kai's going to betray them down the line. Congratulations. You can leave the theater and go home now. In spite of the multi-laned road trip's attempt at an epic scope, each setting the gang visits can be summed up in one word, a mining port. Farm A, and everyone has weird community theater brogues pulled from all over Northern Europe and the white part of the Commonwealth. The combination of poor sound mixing, wooden sci-fi fantasy, vocab, and scattershot accents that wobble from one shot to the next make comprehending a Rebel Moon's dialogue a sure. And I saw this at the Paris Theater. David Fincher's of the Gilruss sounded a grater there. Really, though you don't need to understand a word of it. At no point in this film's runtime will someone verbally convey information you couldn't infer from the visuals on Kai's suggestion. The gang tries to recruit Tarak, a male Modelo-looking fellow who has been enslaved as a blacksmith to pay off his debts. Since they don't have the money to buy his freedom, his owner, Lone Shark Slaver, proposes a wager. If Tak can tame and ward, unruly winged beast that looks like a hippogriff from a Harry Potter but bigger and black, the debt will be settled. If he fails, the rest of the gang will join him in slavery. A broken bar whereupon Turk aims the creature without a problem. There's no tension. The shots of him soaring through the air on Not Buckbeak's back are distractingly fake. Neither he nor the animal look like airborne objects moving through space. A Prisoner of his Cabana came out almost 2 decades ago, but it's a hypograph flight scene as a still look and feel so much better than this. Next, they pick up a mysterious swordswoman known only as Nemesis Dunai. Her visual design is tight as hell, but her cyberpunk Black Widow aesthetic is underserved by her characterization, which is that she's an East Asian woman. Written by an incurious white dude. She rarely speaks or shows emotion. She fights real good. She kills a spider lady to save a kidnapped child, but tells the spider lady that she understands a mother's pain. This is never elaborated upon. Snyder just ticks the box that says womb confirmed and moves on. The gang's least interesting onboarding involves dragging the disgraced alcoholic General Titus Djimon Hounsou off the obligatory Coliseum planet. Apparently he's a genius tactician. Apparently he surrendered and got his whole army killed or something. Moving on, Cora and Gunner might need more than a half dozen randos to fight off an Imperium dreadnought. They supplement their abysmally boring blunt circle with a whole bunch of rebels, bringing their total number from large rock band to average folk punk ensemble. The gang tracks down the rebel forces on the planet of King Leviticus, who seems like a nice doomed fellow during his 30 seconds of Bactery. Despite his narrative significance as a powerful rebel ally in the sole pacifist in Cinder's universe of sadists, martyrs, and a peacer's ache, he typifies the problems with the Rebel Moon's enormous cast, where potentially cool ideas are shortchanged by a lack of screen time and seemingly production resources. His coral and tentacle design would be more impressive if he didn't look like CGI rubber. His dedication to peace and hospitality would carry more weight if we had any connection to him, his people, or the rebels. He risks his life to shelter. Understandably, the rebels are a little reluctant to come out of hiding to defend a tiny farming village from the wrath of the Imperium. We're treated to the rebels' leaders, siblings Darien and Everox, arguing about what they owe to Gunner, who once sold them the village's excess grain. If you don't care for space sweet politics, I'm sorry. Half the film is just mind-numbing discussions about sci-fi commodity logistics. You already know. The rebels will agree to fight beside Cora and Gunner. Did you know Darien Bloodox has a girlfriend? Do you care? Zack seems to think that epicness comes from giving the audience thousands of little glances into thousands of stories taking place in his world. In actuality, this just makes the narrative feel thin and artificially padded. But Zack isn't a storyteller. He's a visionary. Even if his dialogue blows, he does great action, right? I hope that the Rebel Man would, if nothing else, give me some kick-ass fight scenes. I've not been watching too much atmospheric character drama in small award circuit theaters with audiences who keep trying to hand me copies of Faram in Light, and I wanted something slick and flashy like a John Wicker with laser blasters. I was reminded more of the impossible-to-follow CGI slur-up Jupiter ascending the Wachowski sisters' much more visually inspired space epic. Snyder's fights feel overloaded, trying to juggle too many characters to retain legibility. This issue first arises when we watch Cororus slaughter a dozen Imperium soldiers, and their repetitive designs mixed with Snyder's overall editing produce a tableau of PG-13 confusion. It gets worse from there in the film's climactic fight. We're supposed to keep track of basically every character whose name we might remember through wave after wave of indecipherable bloodless violence. It's not helped by the larger aesthetic messiness of Zack Snyder's self-indulgent style. The visual design of the opening scene suggests a stylized, flattened aesthetic like a stage background or storybook illustrations reminiscent of FA300's comics-inspired 2.5D look an interesting invocation of the A-opera half-O fast space opera, but Snyder doesn't develop that idea further. Instead, the rest of Farabooma is a visual soup of his usual terrible color grading. Some scenes are so blue-green that the actors look underwater. Others are so whitishly burnt that they just look like corpses. The biggest victims of Snyder's aesthetic are the actors of color whose skin tones are stripped of detail and rendered lifeless by these decisions. It's 2023. You can color grade your film to suit a whole range of skin tones, not just the Caucasians. They'll cut and sound like everyone talks like their vocabulary tops out at 1,000 words, 250 of which are random Latin nouns. They're only able to use these words to debate tactics, debate grain, or vomit exposition into each other's mouths like mama birds sitting in the theater. I tried to figure out why this 2-hour film felt longer than some of the 4-hour films I've seen this year. Because Snyder's plot and characters lack any kind of originality, you can predict with 100% accuracy where every scene and conversation will lead. Neither heroism nor cruelty comes as a surprise because his heroes and villains have been overdone for decades. The result, waiting through each sequence for an obvious conclusion, with every slip into slow-mo, just another delay, keeping us from the next predictable story beat. Without uncertainty, you can't get the tension and release that creates plot progression. You only get duration. The Imperium forces make for poor villains because they will always take the cruelest option. And so it comes as no surprise that Admiral Noble clubs the village leader to death, or that the soldiers are mustache-twirling gang rapists, or that the Imperium brutally kills a man who's just given them the information they wanted. Yet Snyder's camera and editing treat these as twists leering through slow-motion close-ups, attacks you've anticipated since the scene began. I can't say how much Snyder himself fetishizes violence or the death cult mentality of his heroes and villains, but the cinematography of Far can only get it up for his muddled fights and bizarre rape scenes. Not just hearing the Nami as Zack Snyder seems to invoke wildly different impulses and reactions, depending on which side of the filmmaker you said. In one group, you have the Snyder loyalists who saturate any and everything he puts out while pushing back on even the slightest criticism of his work. But just as feral and often more relegant are the anti-Snyder mudslingers who never pass up on a chance to belittle and berate Snyder's movies and his fans. That brings us to his latest project, Rebel Moon Apart. 1. A Child of Fire. Mark it down. You can expect fans to love it and defend it till their dying breath. Meanwhile, Snyder carpers will be chomping at the bit to tear it down early and often. But how is it really? Once you weed out the voices of the predisposed and get beyond the hyperbole and grandstanding, is Rebel Moon any good? It's actually quite good, although you can tell it's only a slice of a bigger and better whole. The existence of a director's cut is out there, and this current cut all but confirms it. To Snyder's credit, he gives us a good taste of this new original universe he has created. The world is full of vibrant and diverse locations. There are plenty of interesting people, races, and creatures, and the battle lines are clearly distinguished between an oppressive militaristic regime and the valiant group of rebels who rise up to fight back. But they'll need a leader who can bring together the fiercest warriors from across the galaxy if they are to have any chance of winning. That's hardly what you would call an original story, but Snyder is fine with that. He hasn't been shy about honoring his inspirations, and he doesn't attempt to hide his open embrace of numerous classic science fiction tropes. He has set out to make a dark space fantasy that plays like Seven Samurai meets Star Wars. It's not that his story is bold and unique. It's that it is unfolding with characters he has crafted and within a world he has created. Still, this cut of Rebel Moon is more enticing than fulfilling. I found myself thoroughly riveted while in its world, yet it left me needing more of it. For example, the action in this version feels sanitized with the camera too, often turning away to ensure a PG-13 rating. Snyder has said his full cut is wilder and edgier. But more than that, key supporting characters often feel like sketches rather than portraits. Their motivations are vague, and their backgrounds, which in this movie play a big part in defining them, are mostly mysteries. More than anywhere else in the film, it's here that the cuts stand out most. The cast is made up of an intriguing array of talent led by Sofia Boutella. She plays Gore, who lives a quiet life in a small, tight-knit farming village on the mostly peaceful planet of A. Though considered independent, V exists in the shadow of the Mother World, which is ruled by Regent Balisarius Francis Fee. The Mother World was once devoted to peace and prosperity, but following the mysterious assassination of its king, queen, and princess, the then ambitious Senator Belisarius rose to power. He created a massive military known as the Imperium and has used it to strengthen his reign and expand his empire. Korra's village is visited by an Imperium squad, under the command of Admiral Atticus Noble, a fittingly vile Edrin. He's on a mission to hunt down and destroy pockets of resistance that are believed to be hiding among the outer planets. Noble forces the village into a pact to provide an unreasonable amount of grain for his armies. He gives them 10 months to have it ready before showing them the gap. Consequences of failing him. After a group of remaining Imperium soldiers attempt to rape a young local girl, Korra kills them all, revealing a side of herself she has kept hidden from her community. Due to her secret past with the Imperium, Korra knows Noble will retaliate after hearing his soldiers are dead. So she sets off to recruit warriors to help stand against the Imperium. She convinces a fellow villagers named Gunnar Mashiel, who has connections with the Resistance, to accompany her. They're helped off the planet by a mercenary and smuggler named Kai Charlie Hanam. From there, Snyder whisks us from one visually rich and interesting planet to the next, recruiting a new member to his band at each stop. They include a former Imperium general, Djimon Hounsou, a cyborg swordmaster by Una, a prince in bondage, Stas Nair, and a fierce freedom fighter, Ray Fisher. Together they make a formidable team, despite many of them lacking in individual detail. As with other Snyder movies, Rebel Moon features most of the filmmaker's visual trademarks. There's the jaw-dropping CGI, lots of stylish slow motion, and crisply choreographed action sequences. All of it shot by Snyder himself, and as the story progresses, we get several fun nods to past movies, television shows, and genre, as the full title clearly indicates this is just the first part of Snyder's opus, but he does bring it to a kinetic climax before setting up his next film due out in April. Of course, before the next film releases, we will be getting the extended cuddle Fapart Onia in early 2024. This begs the question, why release the first film like this? From every indication, it was a Netflix decision. It seems Snyder was given the green light to go nuts and create whatever he wanted under the agreement that Netflix would release a neutered PG-13 version first. Was it to make a version of the film that was suitable for a broader audience? Was it some bizarre tactic to try and recreate the SN Cut zeal? Either way, this cut certainly entertained me, but what it did most was excite me for the potentially better extended cut that's just around the corner. Director Zack Snyder's films are often buzzworthy and tend to spark passionate opinions. A Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fiery, will likely be no different. The story began as a fail pitch for a narrated a Star Wars movie, before Rhea ultimately landing at Netflix as an original film, and the first entry in an ambitious new series part arrives in April. As a lover of both the sci-fi genre and original storytelling, I was rooting for this movie. It's the sort of film we need to see more often. Unfortunately, it's also a movie that will discourage Hollywood execs from signing off on more. A rebel na is an uncompelling exercise in style over substance, an uninspiring spectacle that cannot overcome its hollow and derivative story. A rebel is an original film in the sense that it is not tied to any existing intellectual property, but the story is clearly inspired by other well-known franchises: Star Wars, Lord of the Rings. The main problem with the rebel na is not that many narrative elements are plot from existing stories, but that while either reflects elements of those classic films, it never captures their soul. Not a rebel na is. Akin to a greatest hits album featuring familiar songs from legendary rock and roll artists being performed by a cover, everything in this film is something audiences have seen done better elsewhere. For example, a tavern scene pays explicit homage to the famous cantina scene Nina, Star Wars, but lacks the same sense of wonder and otherworldliness. A Rebel Mai echoes the classic putting a team together plot from a Seven Samurai and other films, but the assembled team is forgettable and lacks the camaraderie and banner that makes such stories enjoyable. The film gives little reason to feel any emotional attachment to the paper-thin and undeveloped characters. Sofia Boutella is fine in the lead role. She is able to handle the no-nonsense physicality of the character. Unfortunately, Lai, her character, is little more than that physical element. She is too serious and guarded to give audiences much to grasp onto and needs to be surrounded by other dynamic and sympathetic characters. Despite a stellar cast, however, none of the other characters make an impression. The fault is with the script rather than the performances, and none of the actors are given anything of consequence to do. The usually great German Hounds, who plays a legendary but currently down on his luck general. The heroes locate him and recruit him to their cause, but then he doesn't speak again until the very end of the movie. Other characters speak in awe of his tactical skills and strategy, but the audience only ever sees him running around firing a laser gun. The same is true of the other team members. After their initial introductions, they are relegated to passively lurking in background, used only to populate a few action scenes. Director Zack has never been known for character development or complex storytelling. His strength is his ability to create stylized visuals and action. Opinions on his distinctive style are subjective. Buddha Rebelman gives way to all his worst instincts. The visuals are occasionally striking, but rarely feel immersive due to the over-reliance on green screen and unconvincing CGI. The action scenes are also undercut by gratuitous amounts of so much slow motion. Rather than adding an exciting flair, the technique brings the action to a screeching halt and strips it of its energy. My wife remarked at one point, "This is the slowest battle I've ever seen." The stylized element is not just reserved for action scenes either. Even regular actions, such as simply walking down the exit ramp of a spaceship, are given the slow motion treatment. Zack is clearly attempting to lay the groundwork of a larger story. Several characters and plot points are introduced and then quickly abandoned, seemingly left as threads for future films. In many ways, A Rebel feels like the first act of a rut story slowly building toward a climax that never comes. The movie spends most of its 2-hour runtime gathering new characters and trying to set the game board. Then, just when the story finally gets going, the film ends with a title card promising a part 2 next year. The question is, will anyone still remember the story when the sequel arrives? Rebel Miss should be commended for attempting to offer audiences an ambitious and sweeping sci-fi epic, but unfortunately it forgets that it must also give viewers a reason to care about it. I feel when talking about Zack Snyder, it's best to lay the cards on the table from the get-go. I'm indifferent to his work overall. Some of his films I quite enjoy, such as 300 and his CUDA Justice League. Others I'm left wanting on such awesome Man of Steel and the Army of the Dead, never mind a sucker. So I went into A Rebel Moon, a Part 1, a child of Fiery, not as a fan, and with no prior bias or agenda. So with that in mind, I found Snyder's Latest film to be not bad, not amazing, but notice Sucker Punch a bad rebel miss. Started as Snyder's a pitch to Lucasfilm for the next Star Wars film in 2012, right before the Disney acquisition. Naturally, when that sale went through, the studio opted not to follow through with Snyder's project. But the story was still there, and over the years, Snyder would remove the Star Wars angle from his script and work on something within his own unique universe. Thought, well, maybe not that unique, which is one of the problems of Far Moon. It's very derivative of other works, not just Star Wars. In this galaxy far, far away, we find Cora Sofia Boutella, a villager of a backwater farming community. They get visited by the Imperium of the Mother World, led by Admiral Noble Edrin, who demand grain so they can keep their conquest going and stop the rebellion that's springing up in the more backwater parts of the galaxy. Cora is, of course, a deserter from the Imperium and knows a thing or two about their methods and ideologies. With a threat of the return of the Mother World in 10 weeks for the grain core races across the galaxy, with fellow farmer gunner Mashil Hussein to find warriors to help defend the village Dot. In that synopsis alone, you'll recognize the Star Wars influences of a rebellion rising up to fight the sinister empire. But if you're a fan of Star Wars in cinema, you'll for sure see the parallel to Akira Kurosawa's iconic Seven Samurai, which this film borrows from arguably even more than George Lucas' work in terms of the visuals in the film's own mythology. A Rebel A also borrows heavily from Roman history and the warmer 40,000, and there's inspiration from other fantastic and sci-fi projects from The Matrix at the end. Harry Potter, but the Reblimna doesn't hit the same highs as those movies, making it feel like a big-budget fan project. The film does have a strong opening act, keeping it focused on the villagers, and the Imperium Edrin in particular is very compelling, evoking Christoph Waltz Chroma and Glorious Bastards, but with his own spin. Definitely the standout of the film in terms of acting. His character is just bad space fascist with no other layers. Anthony Hopkins is also intriguing as Jimmy, a former soldier droid turned protocol droid, but he has limited screen time, with the payoff to his character arc likely coming in a part 2, the Skara. First look at that movie after this one in the Netflix app. Other members of the cast include Djimon Hounsou, Ray Fisher, Charlie Hunnam doing his best attempt Northern Ireland accent for whatever reason, Donna by Stas Nair, Mr. Allergic to Shirts, and Cariel, among others. But the film does start to lose itself in the second act, when we venture out of the village in search of other warriors. Trebleness starts bouncing around from location to location rather quickly, recruiting warriors whose names I couldn't even tell you, let alone fully dive into their backstories. We meet them, get a quick action scene, and are whisked away to the next recruit. The movie then starts to drag a bit, suffering from feeling stuck on a wheel and not caring about the side characters at all. I think Snyder should have kept the recruits at a smaller number, as there's just too many characters to keep track of and not enough time at 2 hours and 15 minutes with credits. There's also a ton of clunky exposition, and it makes the dialogue rough to listen to, but it's not all doom and gloom. Apart from the performances I've already highlighted, Snyder is known for his visual style, and it's certainly cranking out at maximum capacity here. Just like IA Army of the Dead, Snyder, who wrote the story and co-wrote the screenplay, also serves as cinematographer in his work, seems better in this one with less reliance on the intense, shallow depth of field that was rampant in his zombie epic. Per usual, there's tons of slow-mo too, and it is a bit self-indulgent. I don't need to see rice fall in slow motion. While some of the CG is hit or miss, the overall aesthetic and design of the film are really awesome, especially the costumes. The motion capture for Jimmy is also really impressive and worth the praise, and the general world building is engaging and intriguing. This is a PG-13 2-hour cut of the first movie, but Snyder has gone on record to say that a 3-hour rated The Director's Cuda is coming as well. While I don't understand the point of releasing 2 cuts on a streaming service where the box office isn't an issue, I will say that I'm at least intrigued by the possibility of the extended cut. It could solve a lot of the problems this movie has with pacing and character development, like his own Batman v Superman cut. Unlike the prospect of the Polona director's cut, which, thanks to a shaky lead performance from Walking Phoenix, likely won't be saved with more screen time. As such, Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fiery, is certainly not a train wreck, but it's held back by a lack of originality, pacing, a poor script, and substance, which brings it from a potentially engaging movie to just being kind of whatever. Side note, but one has to wonder if in Froma The Force Awakens, a deserting stormtrooper wasn't in some part influenced by Snyder's script of having a turncoat become a rebel. Food for thought. When Zack Snyder announced his Rebel Moon franchise, he made it clear that this was a story he came up with for the Star Wars franchise once upon a time that got passed on. So like many other creators like him, he just made the story his own. And here it is. Well, in one part anyway, the universe is one where a singular entity has fought and dominated all planets that it deemed valuable. But at the peak of its power, its royal family was assassinated. A regent was put in their place, and the seedlings of rebellion were sown. A lone ship of great power was set out to crush those rebels. But in our story, it just made even more rebels. Rebel Moon Part 1 focuses at first on a simple farming village that is trying to enjoy their simple lives. When they are greeted by the King's Gaze, a ship helmed by Admiral Noble, who is on a quest by the Mother World to root out the rebels, as I mentioned. But like many before them, they tried to gain support through fear. And that brings us to Cora. Cora, played epically by Sofia Boutella, is a runaway whom the village took in. So when they threatened them, she fights back and swears to bring in fighters and the resistance to take down the dreadnought and save their lives. What follows is a fun, albeit brief, at points journey across several worlds as we meet many of the rebels that Cora will fight alongside in the battles to come. Some are who you might expect, like General Titus, the outcast from the Imperium who wants revenge. Others aren't what you would expect, like the robotic Jimmy, whose purpose was lost with the death of the king and his family, yet still has the ability to fight when necessary. As you hop from one world to another, you see just how vast the universe is and the curious beings that live within it. One thing I have seen from various Rebel Moon reviews, both good and bad, is that Zack Snyder takes inspiration from everything that's come before, and he does, but he also uses it to fun and sometimes hilarious effect to make it his own. Like when we meet Tak, who tames a special creature to earn his freedom, a broken bar, and then watches in joy when said beast kills his oppressor. I laughed at that moment too. Nemesis was also someone that I liked despite her limited speaking role in this first film. You might think, oh, she's just the lightsaber character, but it's more nuanced than that, and I want to know more about her. Another thing I saw in other reviews is that there wasn't anything original about Rebel Moon. If you think that, I'm sorry, but we're watching two different films. I saw many things that were unique, clever, and unexpected. For example, by the end of the movie, two key rebels who were heavily promoted die. One you might see coming, and the other you won't. That's what makes Rebel Moon fun in many ways. You revel in the familiar, and then you enjoy what you don't expect. Visually, the effects and looks of Rebel Moon's aliens and planets are very nice. There was only one scene where I said, yeah, that's bad VFX, which is much less than recent DC comics. And Marvel films, if I'm being honest. Plus, with the second film promising even more, I'm curious about what we'll see next. Easily one of my favorite characters outside of Cora was Admiral Noble. A hero's journey tale is only as good as its villain, right? Edrin made every moment he was on screen count. He could play things in a chipper way to make you think he would do one thing when he would do another. Or he could turn on the evil and leave you speechless as to what he did. I honestly thought he was done for by the end of Part 1, and I'm glad I was wrong because he definitely has more to offer this franchise. If you do like Zack Snyder films, or you at least appreciate some of the things he does, you'll find plenty of them here. Slow motion shots, big action beats, a huge scope to the universe, and visually stunning scenes and backdrops. All of it is here, and it makes you hungry sometimes for what he has in mind for Part 2. If you're noticing a theme in my Rebel Moon Part 1 review, it's because if I were to point out a flaw or two in the film, it's that it teases a lot but doesn't always give you everything in return. In this case, outside of Korra, we only get a light backstory on the other rebels. I'm glad we got what we did, but I was hoping for more in spots. The irony is that this is the good kind of hunger. I saw many people who liked the movie say that we could get spin-offs starring these characters, and I wouldn't mind that given the scale and scope we've seen so far. Each of these rebels has stories to tell, and I want to hear them all. The other main problem is that while it doesn't fully suffer from the Part 1 syndrome, you can see certain areas where scenes were cut. If you haven't heard, Snyder made the PG-13 version for Netflix so they could appeal to more people, and there's the director's cut version upcoming that'll be R-rated. I'm curious what will be added in that cut, and it could make the film even better, especially if it fleshes out certain characters and beats more. I did like the film, but again, it left me hungry for more. Continuing on with the Part 1 syndrome problem is that while the film does have a solid ending before teasing Part 2, not unlike, say, Star Wars A New Hope, if you were hoping to see all the rebels showing off their stuff across multiple battles, you will be disappointed. There is a climactic battle where all of them are on display, but you can argue it didn't deliver the payoff that warranted, hoping from one place to another to get all of them. But then again, that's why Part 2 exists. If you do like Zack Snyder films, or you at least appreciate some of the things he does, you'll find plenty of them here. Slow motion shots, big action beats, a huge scope to the universe, and visually stunning scenes. And backdrops. All of it is here, and it makes you hungry sometimes for what he has in mind for Part 2. If you're noticing a theme in my Rebel Moon Part 1 review, it's because if I were to point out a flaw or two in the film, it's that it teases a lot, but doesn't always give you everything in return. And some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting. And if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.